December 1999. Charles Schulz sat alone in his studio when the phone rang. Minutes later, he whispered two words that ended 50 years of work. "It's over." His hands trembled, his vision blurred, and cancer had taken the one thing he lived for: drawing. When asked if Peanuts should continue without him, Schulz refused. "When I'm done, it's done." And just like that, the world's most beloved comic strip ended in silence, not with applause, but with a broken man saying goodbye to his life's only companion. The boy who drew his loneliness. Charles Monroe Schulz was born on November 26, 1922 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a cold city that matched the quiet tone of his early life. His father, Carl, ran a small barbershop and took pride in his steady hands and polite manner. His mother, Dina, was gentle and warm. Though illness often left her confined to bed, money was always tight. They lived through the Great Depression, moving between cramped apartments and counting every dollar. Charles grew up watching his parents struggle to hold the family together with quiet dignity, and he absorbed that silence like a second language. He was their only child, and from the start, he preferred solitude. While other boys roughhoused on frozen streets, Charles found comfort in sketching the world around him: his neighborhood, his parents, and especially his dog, Spike. Spike wasn't just a pet. He was Charles's first real friend. The dog followed him everywhere and seemed to understand him in a way people didn't. When Spike died after being hit by a car, 10-year-old Charles buried him with his own hands. He never forgot the sound of his father's shovel against the frozen dirt. That loss, small to the world but enormous to him, became the emotional seed that would one day grow into Snoopy, a dog who never truly leaves, who dreams and laughs even when his master feels alone. At school, things were worse. Charles was smaller than his classmates, awkward and painfully shy. When teachers asked questions, his voice would freeze. He skipped 2 grades for being bright, but it only made him younger and more isolated. He spent recess sitting alone, tracing doodles in the dirt while other kids played. He later said that Charlie Brown's nervous smile, that fragile hope before every disappointment, came directly from those moments. By the time he reached adolescence, loneliness had become routine. His comfort was drawing. He would spend hours hunched over a scrap of paper, lost in small worlds of his own making. His parents couldn't afford art lessons, but his mother found ways to buy him pencils, sometimes skipping meals to do it. Her faith in him was absolute. "You'll make it one day," she told him. In 1937, at age 14, he drew Spike and sent it to Ripley's Believe It or Not. When they published it, he ran to show his classmates, but no one cared. The joy turned to silence. That moment taught him something that would follow him forever. Even success can be lonely. But still, he kept drawing, because it was the only way he knew how to keep himself alive. War, loss, and the promise that created Snoopy. In 1943, just as Charles Schulz's life was beginning, everything fell apart. His mother, Dana, the only person who believed in his dream, was dying of cervical cancer. He was 20 years old enough to understand but too young to accept it. Every night he heard her cry from the next room, her pain growing worse as the disease spread. He tried to stay strong, drawing little cartoons to make her smile, but nothing could stop what was coming. That winter, he received a draft notice from the U.S. Army. On February 28, 1943, just 3 days before he shipped out, his mother died. He never got to say a proper goodbye. Years later, he would say that every Peanuts strip carried a piece of her inside it, and that Charlie Brown's quiet sadness was born that week. Schulz was assigned to the 20th Armored Division as a staff sergeant, leading a .50 caliber machine gun squad through Europe. He was small, shy, and scared. Not the kind of man built for war. He hated guns. Yet he followed orders, marching across France and Germany through freezing fields, seeing death up close. Once he aimed at a German soldier but forgot to load his weapon. The man surrendered anyway. It was the only time Schulz ever fired a gun. On April 30th, 1945, his division arrived at the Dachau concentration camp, just one day after it had been liberated. Survivors wandered the roads, starved, broken, barely human. That sight haunted him forever. He rarely spoke about it, but the deep empathy and sorrow that filled Peanuts came from those memories. Before leaving for war, Schulz had told his mother, "We'll probably get a dog when I come back." He kept that promise in the only way he could. Years later, Snoopy became that dog, the one who made the world smile, the one she never got to meet. When he returned home in late 1945, Schulz was no longer the boy who loved to draw. He was a man who had seen too much, carrying grief and loneliness that no one could see, except in his art. The birth of Peanuts, and the name he hated. When Charles Schulz came home from the war in 1945, he carried invisible scars. His mother was gone, his youth was gone, and even the world he'd known felt unfamiliar. But one thing hadn't changed: his dream of becoming a cartoonist. He took a small job grading correspondence art lessons at the art instruction schools in Minneapolis. The pay was miserable, but it kept him close to pencils and paper, the only things that made sense anymore. At that school, he began sketching small children who spoke with adult honesty. He called the strip Lil Folks. It appeared in the St. Paul Pioneer Press in 1947. The style was simple, minimal lines, no wasted space, but the emotions were deep. It was gentle, sad, and real. Readers loved it, but the editors didn't. When Schulz asked for a raise and a spot on the main comics page, they refused. After 3 years, they dropped the strip entirely. He was devastated. Still, he didn't quit. He gathered his drawings and sent them to United Feature Syndicate in New York. They liked the strip, but not the name. They said Lil Folks sounded too close to Lil Abner. Without consulting him, they renamed it Peanuts. Schulz was furious. "It's a terrible name," he said. "It makes it sound small, like something insignificant." But he had no power to stop it. On October 2nd, 1950, Peanuts debuted in 7 newspapers. Schulz earned just $90 for the first month. It was humble, almost invisible. 4 tiny panels in the corner of a page. Yet inside those panels was everything he'd lived through: loneliness, failure, hope. The first strip showed Charlie Brown walking by 2 kids saying, "Good old Charlie Brown." Then one adds, "I hate him." It was dark, honest, and funny, a perfect reflection of its creator. 2 days later, Snoopy appeared. At first, he was just a dog, but Schulz saw something in him: a spirit, a dreamer, the part of himself that refused to give up. He didn't know it yet, but those little drawings would soon change his life, and everyone else's, forever. Fame, perfection, and the loneliness behind the smile. By the late 1950s, Peanuts had gone from 7 newspapers to hundreds. Within a decade, it was everywhere. In magazines, on lunchboxes, school walls, even church bulletins. Charlie Brown had become the face of failure everyone could love. Snoopy was the dreamer every child wanted to be. And Charles Schulz, the quiet barber's son from Minnesota, was suddenly one of the most famous men in America. But fame, for him, felt hollow. He was married by then to Joyce Halverson in 1951. And they had children, a home, and the kind of stability he had never known. But emotionally, Schulz was distant. He worked 6 days a week, alone in his studio, drawing each strip by hand. He refused to hire assistants. "No one else can draw my feelings," he said. That obsession made him a legend, but it also isolated him from his family. Joyce once said she felt like a widow with a husband still alive. Beneath the laughter of Peanuts, his own melancholy deepened. He often described himself as a man who can understand sadness. The world adored his humor, but behind every joke was pain. Charlie Brown's endless losses were his own. Lucy's cruelty came from people who'd mocked him, and the little red-haired girl, the one Charlie Brown could never win, was real. Her name was Donna Johnson, an accountant Schulz had loved before his success. He proposed. She said no. She married another man. Schulz never recovered. For the rest of his life, he wrote about her through Charlie Brown's silent heartbreak. In 1965, A Charlie Brown Christmas aired on CBS. Executives thought it would fail. Too quiet, too slow, too religious. But half the country tuned in. It won an Emmy, a Peabody, and became one of the most beloved TV specials of all time. Still, success didn't cure him. "Happiness is a warm puppy," he once said, but sadness is knowing how brief that warmth can be. By the 1970s, Peanuts appeared in more than 1,000 newspapers, earning him millions. Yet even then, Charles Schulz remained what he had always been. A lonely man who turned sorrow into something the world could smile at. The tremor, the lawsuits, and the battle for control. By the mid-1970s, Charles Schulz was at the height of fame, adored, wealthy, and respected as one of the most influential cartoonists in history. Yet behind his steady smile, he was falling apart. Years of working alone, 6 days a week, had taken their toll. He'd drawn nearly 18,000 Peanuts strips without a break. His hand had begun to shake uncontrollably. Doctors called it an essential tremor. Sometimes he had to hold his wrist with his other hand just to keep the pen from wobbling. He was exhausted. His perfectionism had become his prison. When he finally took a short vacation in the mid-70s, the first in more than 2 decades, the world didn't stop. The newspapers simply reprinted old strips. Schulz noticed that readers barely noticed the difference. It frightened him. If his audience couldn't tell the new from the old, was he even still needed? Around this time, his relationship with United Feature Syndicate turned toxic. They wanted changes, fresher ideas, more modern jokes, maybe even other artists to help him. Schulz refused. "If anyone else draws Peanuts, it's not Peanuts," he told them. Behind his back, the syndicate secretly hired Superman artist Al Plastino to create backup strips in case Schulz quit or died. They stockpiled over a year's worth of material. When Schulz discovered it in 1977, he was furious. He felt betrayed, but instead of walking away, he used his anger to renegotiate his contract. From then on, Peanuts could never be drawn or written by anyone else, not even after his death. The 1980s brought new challenges. Rival cartoonists accused him of stealing ideas, especially for Snoopy's sidekick, Woodstock. He fought them in court and won, but the battles drained him. Then came heart surgery in 1981, forcing him to pause work for the first time in 31 years. During his recovery, counterfeit Peanut strips began circulating in over 200 papers, filled with adult jokes and fake dialogue. The FBI even launched Operation Snoopy to stop it. The world saw Schulz as unstoppable, but privately his body was breaking down, and his spirit wasn't far behind. Each new strip was a fight against time, against his own trembling hands, and against the fear that one day he wouldn't be able to draw at all. "I'm done." The phone call, the farewell, and the night the ink went silent. By the late 1990s, Charles Schulz was 76 and visibly worn down. His hand tremor had worsened. The clean lines of Peanuts had grown shakier. He was still drawing every day, but now with pain and fatigue. The world saw the same calm man in interviews, but at home, his wife Jean noticed the struggle, the frustration when he couldn't control the pen, the quiet rage when he had to redraw a single panel again and again. In November 1999, everything came crashing down. He was rushed into emergency surgery for a blocked artery. During the operation, doctors found something far worse, stage 3 colon cancer that had already spread. The treatment damaged his vision. He went blind in one eye, and his hands could no longer obey him. It was over, and he knew it. But he couldn't accept it. He had never missed a single day of Peanuts in 50 years. The strip wasn't just his job, it was his life. That December, the syndicate called. They needed an answer. Would Peanuts continue with another artist, or would it end with him? Schulz sat in silence for a long time, then said the words that ended an era. "I'm done." He refused to let anyone else touch his work. "No one can draw these characters but me," he told them. And with that, he signed his final strip. On December 14th, 1999, he went public with his retirement. During an emotional interview on the Today Show, tears streamed down his face. "I never dreamed this is how it would end," he said softly. "But all of a sudden, it's gone. It's been taken away from me." 2 months later, on February 12, 2000, he died peacefully in his sleep, just hours before his final Sunday strip appeared in newspapers around the world. In that farewell comic, Snoopy sat at his typewriter writing, "Dear friends, thank you for your support." It was his goodbye letter, drawn by his trembling hand, printed the morning after he was gone. The man who gave the world laughter and light had left it the way he lived, quietly, humbly, and with ink still drying on the page. Charles Schulz spent 50 years turning loneliness into laughter and heartbreak into hope. He never missed a single day, not until his body forced him to. And when he finally let go, the world cried with him. Even now, decades later, Peanuts still speaks to something deeply human, that mix of sadness, courage, and quiet grace. So here's the question. When you think of Peanuts, what do you remember most? Charlie Brown's failure, Snoopy's dreams, or the man behind them who never stopped trying? Tell me below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that change the world forever.